So I'm just trying to figure out if this thing is either Dr. Jumba's experiment 625 or 627. Big props to anyone who understood the reference of that opening gag. So, Doctor Who, the Tsuranga Conundrum, episode 5 of series 11. And there's a number of things going on here that I think were done quite well and I found quite interesting. I'm really continuing to really appreciate the development of Graham and Ryan's relationship. I feel like there's a decent amount of work being done in developing actually both of them individually as characters, but also their relationship with each other is something that keeps getting touched back on in small ways and more prominent ways, depending on the episode. It's a little more prominent here, but looking at what we've gotten so far for the series arc, I'm liking that quite a bit. Jodie Whittaker's is doing fine. Like, I'll say what I've continued to say. I have yet to have the moment where I fall in love with her, but when I say that, I don't mean that as a criticism. It took basically almost an entire series for me to fall in love with Capaldi, but by the time he was done, he was one of my favorite Doctors. So, I don't need to fall in love with the Doctor right off the bat. I still have no issue with her portrayal of the Doctor. One thing I absolutely liked a lot was I really liked her dynamic with sort of the head medical guy on this ship, because they get into an accident. She's finding herself in a lot of really dangerous situations with her companions that she basically gets rescued by luck by a third party. It's like the second time that's happened this blatantly at the start of an episode. In any case, the guy who's like captaining the ship and is the main guy there, I found that dynamic between him and the Doctor to be really fascinating, because basically he pushed back against her with the exact kind of authority and approach that the Doctor usually uses to sort of take command of a situation. It was really interesting to see that dynamic kind of flipped, and it could have come across basically as the Doctor taking a subservient role, and with this being the first time the Doctor's been a woman, that could have read very badly. I personally don't think it came across that way at all. I think enough was established to show the Doctor is still kind of a little bit off her game, recovering from the sonic mine that they ran into at the very start of the episode, so I was okay with it on that basis. And then, in addition to that, I think it was just a well-explored dynamic. So it's a real shame that character gets ejected and then blown up, I don't know, about a third of the way into the episode, and nothing that remains is as interesting or dynamic as that relationship was. So this episode, it feels very reminiscent of, say, 42. Which is another Chris Chibnall written episode, from back in Tennant's era. And not so much necessarily in terms of tone and everything else, but I mean just in the general sense of there's nothing really wrong with it. I'll have specific nitpicks, but there's nothing really that stands out about it either. I mean, even the things that I mentioned are nice, but they're not strong enough to make me go like, I want to watch this episode again for that one thing. They're not that, like, there are episodes that I don't think are that good, but will still but there's that thing, I want to watch that again. I mean, something like Capaldi's speech in The Zygon Inversion is a good example, because I think a lot of people really overpraise that two-parter pretty much on the strength of that speech. Whereas the two-parter itself, that speech aside, has a lot of problems. But, it has that thing. That's the thing. This episode doesn't have a thing. Like I said, the most interesting guest character gets removed fairly early on, and whoever's left is pretty bog standard. I mean, as soon as there's a pregnant character, pregnant guy in this case, as soon as there's a pregnant character, they're going to go into labor at an inopportune time. That's just duh. It's Chekhov's pregnancy is what it is. Although I will say I liked the little twist in the explanation of why a guy is pregnant, because sort of extraterrestrial, alien, unusual space situations. A guy is pregnant. It's not exactly a new thing. I mean, you know, the Orville kind of had it in its first season. I mean, for crying out loud, Red Dwarf did it decades ago. So it's not exactly new ground, but I did like the little detail that with his species, men give birth to men, women give birth to women. That's kind of cool. I kind of like that it's not just a flip of, oh, well, you know, this is in this species, the men just have the babies. Like, no, we're going to do it differently than that. That was kind of a nifty idea. Like, it didn't make having a pregnant character who goes into labor during the climax of the episode any more original, but, I mean, it was a neat little spin on it, so there's that. I think if there's a major failing of this episode, it's the design on the creature, the pating, which, first of all, it just sounds like onomatopoeia. Like, what a weird name. But it's too cute. I'm not saying you can't have a cute alien, but generally if Doctor Who's going to do a cute alien, it's usually not something that is going to be this directly threatening. So, like, the adipose are cute, but the adipose themselves aren't really an active threat. So, like, this thing brought to mind the Slitheen, in that it's supposed to be threatening, but it's this chubby-cheeked, cute kind of thing. And that takes a lot of the impact out of it, especially when paired with the music. Now, I want to be clear, the music is not bad, but there was a massive disconnect when I'm hearing the music. The music is telling me this is super dangerous, and I look down and, oh, like, it's Stitch's chubby cousin. You know, the visual of what this creature looked like and what the story needed it to be in terms of the level of a threat and what the music was telling me, you know, I should be taking this seriously. Those elements did not line up, like, at all. And my assumption was the reason it looks cute is because eventually it'll be like, oh, but it's actually, you know, it's a misunderstanding and it's not inherently malicious, which kind of happens, but they didn't really give it a like, oh, it's just a cute thing moment, which I was expecting them to do. So the fact that they didn't, I mean, I suppose that's a good thing, because otherwise it would have been super obvious and I would have called it. But at the same time, if you're not going to do that, why does it look this cute? Like I said, it's just a weird choice, given how much the episode and the music especially are hammering home the danger level of this thing. It's just, yeah, it doesn't really work. But like I said, I don't think it's an awful episode. The impression I'm getting, like, from just I haven't watched anyone else's review yet, but the impression I'm getting from just the general vibe is not very positive on this one, and I don't think it's that bad. I think, honestly, it's a fairly typical Chibnall episode in that, you know what, people are hating on this more than it's worth. It's not great, but it's not that bad, which is about how I feel about 42, The Power of Three, his Silurian two-parter. They're fine. And I'm gonna, like, since this is the halfway mark of the season, why don't we sort of, and I don't have too much more to say about the specific episode, let's pause for a second and sort of give my thoughts about Chibnall's writing right now. I think in a lot of ways we are seeing something that tracks very well with the strengths that I saw when I watched, say, Broadchurch. Because at the end of the day, the strength of Broadchurch, and again, keep in mind, I only saw Series 1 on that one. I didn't really have time to do more than that. But the strength of that show was in the characters, both in their conception and original characterization, and also in the development of them over time. And I do honestly think that the characters right now are the strength of this show. As much as I may think Yaz is still a little bit of a hanger-on and not doing as much, she's still solid. I really like Ryan. I really like Graham. I am enjoying the Doctor, even though I'm not completely in love with her yet. The characters are the strong suit, which I think is Chibnall's strong suit. The problem is the actual stories are decent, but not great. And also I think that's kind of reflective of Broadchurch as well. Broadchurch's actual narrative is fairly standard, basic. What makes it good is the characters and the situation and everything else. The problem is that with that skill set, he kind of got away with it in Broadchurch because it was a setting in a scenario, murder mystery that people are very familiar with, audiences, I mean. So when we watch that, we're there to latch into the characters. Maybe some people are there for the mystery, but having a really good, well-developed characters is what's going to set that apart from the million other times that's been done. Doctor Who is or should be doing stories that are not things that you could just see anywhere else. And so while it is still good to have the characters work really well, the stories kind of need to be good. They need to be landing harder. They need to be a bit more original, a bit less perfunctory than this. And I think in a lot of ways this supposition is going to be put to the test over the next 4 episodes from here, because the next 4 episodes were written by other writers, not even Chris Chibnall as a co-writer, because every episode we've gotten so far this series, he either wrote himself, or in the case of Rosa, which, while I have very complicated feelings about that episode, I do think is probably the best written episode of the series so far, had a co-writer who was there. Even though the Ghost Monument was probably the episode I liked the most, I still wouldn't say that it's necessarily the strongest writing in terms of story. There's a lot of stuff that I liked about it, but I still can't say that that's a strong story episode. And so that's where my concerns are coming in as we have hit the midway point of this first series of Whittaker's run, is just that the character work is good and the cast is good, but the stories that they're being put into are not much better than fine. And not every episode of Doctor Who ever has to have a mind-blowing story where it's all about the timey-wiminess, or it's some big epic thing or whatever. It doesn't need to be that every time, but yeah, you can have episodes like this that are lighter episodes, but with that feeling like it's being the standard episode, that worries me. I had been very encouraged when I heard that they were going to be focusing on standalone episodes and not series arcs, which I think was a good thing. But, when I think of great standalone episodes of Doctor Who, I think of things like Blink. I think of Vincent and the Doctor. I think of The Family of Blood and Human Nature. I think, that two-parter, Impossible Planet of the Satan Pit. All of these are fantastic standalone episodes. And the standalone episodes that we're getting, it feels like there just isn't as much effort being put into the story element. And I'm not saying there's no effort being put in at all, but it's being put in on the character and some of the production values, because it still looks pretty good. Even the creature, as much as I don't like the design for a totally CGI creature, it's one of the better looking ones of that for Doctor Who, although when it eats things, they just kind of disappear into its mouth. But, how else are you going to do that with something this small eating as much as it is? But, visually, the shows look good. The acting is good, the characters are good, but it feels like the concepts, the stories, the writing, the thrusts of the episodes, outside of what the characters are doing, the actual situations they're being put in are just okay, and that's a little concerning. So I guess I'll leave it there. Like I said, there isn't really much to say about this episode. It's a couple of things I liked, a couple of things I didn't. It runs neutral. It's fun. So, yeah. So that and my thoughts on the series so far being about midway through. What are your thoughts about this episode? Whatever they are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Whole bunch of stuff you can do down there, too, because there's links and there's buttons, including, to my Patreon, if you feel like supporting me that way. If you don't, though, don't sweat it, because at the end of the day, you are the council, and I just run the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned.